Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins in the twilight of the Second Age, when the shadow of Mordor stretched long across the lands of Middle-earth. The banners of the free peoples gathered upon the threshold of war. Elves from Linen, fair and proud, men of Numor, tall and grim, and dwarves from distant mountains. Each answered the call of the last alliance, bound together to challenge the power of Sauron, the Dark Lord. Among the high captains of that host was Elend of Rivendell, though he bore no crown nor scepter. He was young yet by the reckoning of the Elendil, but wise beyond his years, for he had dwelt long in the house of Gil-galad, and had learned much of lore, of healing, and of war. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, his eyes clear and gray as the sea in winter, and his heart held firm even as dread crept into the whirl. He rode not at the head of armies, but as herald and counselor to the high king, Gil-galad of Linen, who wielded Alo, the spear of ice, and whose wrath against evil was unquenchable. It was Elrond's charge to carry the king's words, to see the paths were clear and the companies strong, and to speak hope where shadow fell. As the vast host approached the desolate plain called Dagorlad, the battle plain, their march slowed. Before them stretched a land twisted by dark sorcery, scarred by ancient strife, and riddled with marsh and mere. The Dead Marshes they were called, though none knew then what lay buried beneath the brackish pools. The sky above was ever dim, and a stink clung to the earth like the breath of some unseen beast. The army made camp upon the northern edge of the marshes. Fires burned low under shrouded stars, and watchmen stood with swords unsheathed. It was a place of silence, heavy and unnatural, where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. On the eve of their crossing, Gil-galad summoned Elrond to his tent, where the firelight danced upon shields and banners. There, in hushed tones, he spoke of scattered orc war bands seen skirting the flanks of the march, silent and swift as carrying crows. He entrusted Elend with a sealed letter meant for the Lord of the Galadrim who had encamped farther east, and bade him ride at first light with a small guard. "This message must not fall into enemy hands," said Gil-galad, his voice heavy with foresight. "Go swiftly and return before the sun sets again, for I sense the storm draws near." And so, as the sun broke pale upon the misted land, Elend mounted his silver-gray steed and rode from the camp, accompanied by 10 warriors of Linden, archers and swordsmen, fleet and sure of foot. Among them was Captain Long, a grizzled elf who had fought in the wars of Boleriand and wore his scars like badges of honor. They followed a narrow causeway through the reeds, keeping to high ground where they could, though the paths twisted and shifted under their feet. The land seemed to resist them. Trees hunched like old men whispering in the fog, and every step gave the uneasy sense of being watched. They had not gone far when the first arrow struck. It came without warning, black-fledged and silent, burying itself in the neck of the rearmost rider. He fell with a gasp, and before his body touched the earth, the marsh erupted with snarls and shrieks. Orcs, dozens of them, their eyes gleaming like coals, burst from the reeds on either side. Some bore curved blades, others crude spears and hooked axes. Their armor was patchwork, cobbled from bone and rusted iron, but their ferocity was like a wave crashing upon a cliff. Aaron's voice rose clear above the din. "Form the circle!" The elves drew together, blades flashing like stars, and a ring of steel met the charge. Arrows whistled, Lirin loosed shafts with deadly aim, felling orcs with each draw, even as blood streamed down his brow where a blow had grazed him. But they were outnumbered. One by one the elves fell. A spear took Curdle in the gut, and he sank to his knees with a cry. Thandor was pulled from his horse, swallowed by snarling foes. Elrond fought beside Luron. His sword had a fang singing through the air, but the tide pressed hard. Then came a break in the battle, a lull, brief as a breath. The surviving orcs drew back, regrouping, and Elrond saw his chance. "Into the fen!" he cried. "Scatter! Regroup beyond the barrel mound!" It was a risky command, but the road was death. In small numbers they might slip away and draw the orcs apart. The elves obeyed, melting into the mists like phantoms. Lateron, limping from a gash in his leg, stayed close to Elrond, clutching the sealed message to his chest. Behind them rose the howls of pursuit. The marsh closed around them like the folds of a cloak. Pools of murky water gleamed underfoot. Twisted roots clawed at their boots, and strange lights flickered in the fog, blue and pale like ghost lanterns. "Stay ahead of them," Elend urged, guiding Leon through a narrow trail. "If we reach the old causeway, we can loop back toward the hills." But the orcs were tireless. Soon the clash of boots came again, nearer now, and darker figures loomed in the fog. Elrond turned. "Go," he said. "I'll hold them here." Leon shook his head. "I swore to guard you, and I to guard this message." Elrond grasped the older elf by the shoulder. "You are wounded. Make for the rise and light a beacon. I'll draw them off." Then he turned and ran straight into the gloom, his cloak streaming behind him like smoke. The chase had begun. Elone ran as a shadow among shadows, swift and silent, his feet finding purchase upon roots and sodden stones where a lesser being might have stumbled or sunk. The cries of the orcs echoed behind him, vile and eager, their guttural tongues spitting curses as they gave chase. Yet the mists of the marsh, though foul and clinging, were friendlier to the elven-born than to those born of darkness. The land, treacherous to all who treaded, offered secrets to those who listened. Elrond did not flee blindly. Even as his breath came hard and his heart thundered in his chest, he marked the rise of the land to the east, where a low hill loomed through the haze like the humped back of some buried beast. Toward it he turned, weaving through bog and bramble with purpose in every stride. It was not long before the marsh thickened and the path became a mere. Black water pulled where earth should be, and twisted trees loomed overhead, their bark pale and peeling like old bone. Here the air grew heavier, and a dread silence fell, broken only by the splash of his steps and the faint, unnatural sighing of wind through hollow reeds. Elrond slowed, listening. The orcs were close behind still, but they stumbled and swore as they pursued, for the marsh betrayed them, and their clamor rose with every blunder. He passed beneath a leaning willow, whose limbs hung low like the arms of a weeping giant, and there, for the briefest of moments, the noise of pursuit lessened. Elrond slipped behind a curtain of moss and knelt among the roots, pressing his back to the gnarled trunk and drawing his cloak about him. He closed his eyes and calmed his breathing. Long had he studied the arts of concealment, of moving unseen and unheard, and in that moment he was as still as the barrowstones of the north. The orcs drew near. He could hear them now, panting, bickering, and swearing vengeance. A pair of them passed within mere feet of where he crouched, their boots sloshing through the mud. One bore a jagged sword across his back. The other carried a torch whose flames sputtered and hissed in the damp air. Elrond held motionless, his fingers wrapped about the hilt of Hardathong. Though he did not draw, the moment to strike had not come, and needless bloodshed would only reveal his path. They passed, and the marsh swallowed their steps. Slowly, Elrond rose and pressed on, circling wide along the ridge of the hill. He climbed carefully, testing each foothold until he reached the crest. There he paused, turning his keen gaze northward. Through a break in the mist, he glimpsed the dark line of the enemy's host in the far distance, a sea of tents and iron, silent and terrible. But closer, far closer, a small light blinked once, then again upon the eastern slope. Later on had made it. The beacon was lit. Relief stirred in Aeron's breast. Yet he dared not tar. He must return, and swiftly, for the orcs were not far, and the message still weighed heavy upon the fate of the war to come. But as he turned to descend, a cry rang out, a harsh, guttural call that shattered the uneasy quiet. The orcs had found his trail anew. From the reeds below, a horn sounded deep and braying like the bellow of some fell beast, and the marsh erupted with noise. Elend ran, his cloak billowing behind him like a banner of twilight. He made for the narrow isthmus of dry land that cut through the mere, a path half forgotten by the world, known only to those who remembered the old maps of Beleriand's ruin. It was a perilous way, for it passed near a place the Elar avoided, a mound older than memory, where stone idols lay toppled in the mud, and whispers were said to echo even when no wind blew. Yet Elend did not turn aside. The path narrowed as he passed into the shadow of the mound, and the air grew chill. A strange stillness clung to the place, and the reeds did not stir. Though no sun pierced the sky, a dim light seemed to shimmer from the very soil, casting pale reflections on the stagnant pools. It was then that he heard it, a low voice, soft and mournful, rising from beneath the earth. Elend froze. The voice was not orcish. It spoke in a tongue long lost, slow and sorrowful, like the murmur of forgotten waters. He knew not what it said, yet it pierced his heart with a cold dread. The light seemed to grow brighter, and in the water at his feet he saw a flickering shape, pale and thin, with hollow eyes and arms outstretched, a wraith of the Dead Marshes. Elrond stepped back. The image did not follow, but many others flickered into being. Faces, hands, broken weapons. The dead of ancient battles lay below, their spirits restless, and now drawn forth by the stirrings of war once more. With a whispered prayer to Elrith, he turned from the vision and pressed onward. The orcs were behind, but he would not falter. The path led him toward higher ground, where the mists began to thin. He crested a low ridge just as the first hint of golden light touched the sky, pale and weak though it was. Before him lay the land where the armies of the last alliance gathered. Far across the field he saw them standards fluttering in the breeze. Ranks of elves and men arrayed for war. Trumpets sounded faintly on the wind, and the banners of linden rose high, bearing the silver stars of Gil-galad. Elrond's heart lifted, but even as he descended the slope, a last ambush lay in wait. From behind a crumbling stone arch, a band of orcs emerged, more cunning than the rest, silent and cruel-eyed. They had followed the signs he left, and now sought to cut him down before he could reach safety. He had a thong at last, the blade gleaming with a cold light. With a cry he met them. Steel rang upon steel, and though they were many, he was swift and sure. He fought like one touched by destiny, his movements honed by years of training and the fire of purpose burning bright within him. One fell, then another, but he could not hold forever. Then came the sound of horns, clear and fierce, and down the slope came a company of elves, lay a run at their head, though pale and bloodied still. They charged with bright blades drawn, and the orcs turned to flee, their courage broken. Aaron stood panting, his sword slick with black blood. Lirin clasped his arm. "You made it," he said, voice rough with pain. "As did you, Deltron," replied the message delivered. And so, upon the dawn before the great battle, Eland returned to the host of Gil-galad, weary but unbroken. The letter he bore had reached its mark, and the alliance stood prepared. The war had not yet begun, but the first tests had been passed, and the dark would find the free peoples ready. How the day of battle dawned in full, pale and grim upon the vastness of Dagorlad, the battle plain, a wide and broken land where no tree grew and no bird sang. The skies were veiled in ash and cloud, for the fires of Odruin smoldered ever to the south, and from Mordor's gate issued smoke and shadow like breath from the em of a slumbering beast. The host of the last alliance was arrayed in shining order upon the northern edge, their banners stirring in the slow breeze, their shields gleaming like morning stars above a field of dark earth. Elves in long lines, golden-haired and silver, with malik woven light and spears as tall as trees, stood beside grim-faced men of the west, malik-clad and tall, bearing the crescent of Numor upon their helms. Behind them rose the pennants of Arnor and Gondor, and among the companies of Gil-galad and Elendil there marched also many of lesser kindreds. Folk of the greenwood, horsemen from distant Rhûn turned against the shadow, even dwarves of the lonely mountain, grim and silent beneath heavy helms. Elrond stood once more at the side of Gil-galad, his cloak newly mended, his blade cleaned and sheathed, though still stained faintly from the trials of the day before. He bore no helm, but a circlet of silver rested upon his brow, and a brooch of 7 stars clasped his cloak at the shoulder. Around him the captains of the Eldar gathered, silent as statues, their eyes turned southward, watching the gates of Mordor with unblinking gaze. The land before them stretched flat and gray, strewn with broken stone and patches of foul water. The remnants of older wars long forgotten by most, but not by the elves. Long they waited, for the hosts of Sauron did not march in haste. From the Black Gate, the Moranan, there came at last the sound of drums, deep and booming like thunder beneath the earth, and the clang of iron echoed across the plain. Then out of the dark marched the enemy, rank upon rank of orcs, black-armored and fierce-eyed, followed by creatures more fell. Great trolls clad in spiked harness, twisted men of the east with cruel spears, and beasts of war that had not walked the earth since the elder days. The hosts of darkness moved like a black tide, relentless and vast, and they spread across the plain until the light itself seemed swallowed by their number. Gil-galad raised Iglos his spear, and the cry of the elves rang out like the call of eagles from the mountains. Beside him stood Elendil the Tall, father of kings, and he drew Narsil, the sword that shone with cold fire. With their banners high they led the charge, and the ground shook with the tread of many feet. The two great hosts clashed like waves upon a shore, and the earth groaned beneath them. In the thick of battle, Elrond fought, not as herald now, but as warrior of the High King, and his sword was like a flame in the dark. His thoughts were no longer on messages, nor counsels, but only on the foe before him, and the shield of the comrade at his side. The orcs came in endless ranks, shrieking and biting, but the elves of Lindon did not give way. With spear and sword they met the tide, and though many fell, they held their ground. Elrond moved among them, swift and tireless, his voice rising in the battle tongue of the Alar, rallying those who faltered, binding wounds with swift skill when the chance allowed, and ever striking down those who dared come near. The battle raged for hours, uncounted, and the plain ran red with blood. The sky darkened further, and strange winds rose from the south. At times it seemed the darkness would prevail, for the power of Sauron lay heavy upon the hearts of men, and many feared to look upon the face of the foe. Yet in the center of the field, the High King still stood, his spear glittering with fire, and beside him the Lord of Ununi, tall as a tower, a light in the shadow. Elend, fighting now upon the right flank, found himself drawn to a place of peril, where a great troll had broken through the line and laid waste to a company of archers. With a cry he leapt forward, striking beneath its arm where no plate covered. The beast roared and lashed out, but he ducked aside quick as a shadow, and a second stroke felled it at last. The archers rose again, wounded but unbroken, and cheered him before returning to their life. But the battle showed no sign of end, and as dusk fell, the air grew colder, and strange shapes moved among the slain. The spirits of the marsh stirred once more, drawn to the blood and terror of war, and faint lights glimmered at the edges of vision. Elend saw them not alone, for others murmured of ghost faces in the pools, of whispers that chilled the soul. Still they fought, for there was no retreat. In the midst of that endless slaughter, word came to Elend that Lirin had fallen, struck down by a poisoned blade. The captain had led his company to the very teeth of the enemy before he was brought low, and his body lay now among the heaped dead. Elrond, heart-sore yet unshaken, bowed his head only once, then took up the fallen standard and raised it high. The warriors of Lindon, seeing it aloft, surged forward with renewed fury, and the enemy gave ground. As the sun sank behind the western mountains, a cry rose from the center. The standard of the Dark Lord had been seen, towering above the field like a thundercloud. Sauron had come forth at last. Then the captains drew back to reform, for the hour of greatest peril had come. Elend returned to the High King, his hands stained, his cloak rent, but his eyes ooned. He found Gil-galad, grim and silent, his face pale beneath the silver helm. "Darin comes," Elrond said, though the words were scarcely needed. Gil-galad looked to the dark tower in the distance, and then to his friend. "And so the doom of this age draws near. Stay close, Elend, and do not let your courage fail. You have a part yet to play, though you do not see it." Elend bowed his head, though in his heart he felt a heaviness that words could not lift. Night fell, and fires burned across Dagorlad. The field was not won, nor yet lost, but the next day would bring the reckoning, when the fate of all free folk would hang upon the edge of a sword, and the will of kings would be tested to its utmost. Darkness lay full upon Dagorlad, and the field of battle was still, save for the low moans of the wounded and the shuffling of watchers among the fallen. The stars were veiled, and the wind carried a bitter scent from the south, acrid and choking, as though Mordor exhaled its malice upon the world. No songs were sung that night. No horns were sounded in triumph. For the first day of battle had brought no victory, only loss heaped upon weariness, and the knowledge that worse was yet to come. Fires flickered in the camps of the free peoples, casting long shadows across the tents where warriors rested with sword in hand and dreams full of ash and flame. Elend sat apart from the others near the edge of the elven camp, his face turned toward the hills where the enemy lurked unseen. His garments, once fair and finely woven, bore the marks of war, rents where blade had struck, smears of blackened blood, and the gray dust of many fallen stones. Hadang lay across his knees, cleaned and wrapped, though not yet returned to its sheath, for he had no will to rest, while the night held such peril in its breath. His thoughts were troubled and turned often to Diren, whose body had been borne from the field with reverence, but without ceremony, as was the custom of warriors in war, for grief must yield to duty while danger still endured. He remembered the old captain's laughter, the way his voice had risen in battle to stir the hearts of younger elves, and the last glance he had cast as he vanished into the mist with the king's message clutched close to his breast. In that fleeting moment before they had parted, there had been no farewell, only purpose shared between comrades who had faced death too often to waste words upon it. Yet there was little time for mourning, for before the dawn had crept over the highlands, messengers came with tidings dire. Sauron himself had issued from Barad-dûr, and now walked among his legions, clad in black armor that drank the light, his mace in hand, and a dread power about him that bent the will of lesser beings. Where he passed, the orcs howled with fevered frenzy, and even the great trolls bowed low in terror and obedience. No longer did the hosts of Mordor fight in scattered packs or careless fury. Now they moved with grim purpose, as if one dark mind guided them, and the earth groaned beneath their tread. Thus it was that Gil-galad summoned his captains once more beneath the ancient banner of the stars, and there he laid his plan for the tomorrow. Elendil stood with him, tall and stern, his great helm removed so that his face might be seen by all, weathered and wise and resolute. Beside them stood Isolde, his son, whose eyes were shadowed, though his voice was proud. And behind them a circle of lords and marshals, both elf and man, arrayed in a grim brotherhood that bound the fates of their kindreds together. Listened in silence as Gil-galad spoke, his voice like wind through stone, calm yet unyielding. The High King would lead the center where Sauron was most likely to strike, and there he would meet the Dark Lord face to face. Elendil and the men of Numor would hold the left flank, while the Greenwood folk and the scattered companies of the lesser realms would hold the right under the command of Orfair and Emir. Though it was plain to all that they lacked the discipline of the western hosts, when the council was done, Gil-galad turned to Elend and beckoned him aside. There was a long pause between them, the kind that falls between those who have long understood one another without need for speech. At last the king spoke, not in the voice of command, but in that quiet tone that only friends are given. "You have seen more than most, Elend," he said, his eyes reflecting the distant watchfires. "And you will see more still, I deem, if fortune and the valor favor us. There are choices yet before us, and they will not be easy." Elend bowed his head, though no smile touched his lips. "You speak as one who already sees the end, my lord." Gil-galad looked away toward the darkness that marked the edge of the world. "I see many endings," he said, "and I do not know which shall come to pass, but of one thing I am certain. Sauron will not be defeated by armies alone. His strength lies not only in the might of his arm, but in the will he bends to others, in the despair he swizz. If he is to be cast down, it must be by courage stronger than fear, and hope that endures even when the light fails. Elrond made no answer, for he felt then the weight of foresight pressing upon him like a great stone. He looked upon his king, and though Gil-galad stood tall and unbowed, radiant in his mail and noble of bearing, a shadow had already fallen across him, and Elrond's heart was troubled. The night passed slowly, and many found no sleep, lying wakeful beneath the stars they could not see. Some sharpened their blades or tended to the wounded. Others whispered songs of old in the hush of the wind. Songs of the first age and the lost cities, of Beleriand drowned beneath the sea, and heroes long forgotten save in the memory of the elves. When the dawn at last broke, pale and colorless, the field of Dagorlad was shrouded in mist, and the cries of carrion birds wheeled high above the plain. The armies rose again and formed their lines, silent and grim, for all knew that this day would decide the fate of the age. Elrond took his place beside Gil-galad once more, the standard of Linden unfurled above him. He looked out over the vast array of their host, and then beyond to the black banners of Mordor rising in the east like a storm come to life. The horns sounded at last, deep and clear, and the lines began to march. The second day of the Battle of Dagorlad had begun. As the light of the pale dawn filtered through the clinging mists that hovered low upon the plain, the armies of the free peoples moved forward with measured tread. Their shields raised and their banners held aloft like beacons against the gathering gloom. No shout went up to mark their advance, nor the ringing of glad horns, for this was no charge of triumph, but the march of duty, grim and fated beneath the shadow of death. The ground beneath their feet was black and broken, churned by the trampling of countless boots and soaked with the blood of the fallen. And as they came once more into the place of slaughter, their eyes beheld the ruin wrought on the day before. There lay elves and men together, their limbs twisted in final defiance, their weapons still clutched in lifeless hands. Smoke curled from shattered siege engines, and arrows jutted like thorns from the carcasses of beasts now stiff with death. The very air hung heavy with the stench of fire and decay, and the silence of the morning was filled with the whisper of flies. Yet none turned aside, and no voice spoke, for their hearts were steeled against horror, and their minds bent wholly toward the foe. Beside them the legions of Mordor stirred, and a sound arose, deep and foul, like the grinding of stone beneath iron. The hosts of the Dark Lord were now fully arrayed, a black sea of spears and blades stretching from the foot of the Affel-Duath to the bitter eastern fence. Orcs in their countless thousands moved in uneven ranks, gibbering and snarling, their eyes gleaming with hatred and madness. Above them towered the trolls of Gorgoth, massive and cruel, bearing great maces and shields of spiked iron, while behind them loomed monstrous war machines, dark towers on wheels, and rams crowned with the jaws of dragons. Upon a hill of slag and scorched stone rose a mighty standard, sable and crimson, bearing the lidless eye, and all who looked upon it felt a chill into their hearts. Then came the moment when the two great armies clashed anew. The signal was given, and horns rang out, long and mournful, like the last call of a distant realm now fading into legend. The ground trembled beneath the charge of the Nummenorian heavy infantry, their shields locked, their spears bristling, and beside them marched the elves of linen, swift and silent as flowing water, their blades glimmering like starlight. The hosts of Mordor met them with a thunderous roar, and the plain was swallowed in battle once more. Elend was among the first to reach the enemy, his sword drawn and his voice raised in the ancient tongue of the High Elves, calling to his kindred to stand fast. He moved with a grace that belied the fury of the fight, his blade a blur of silver light, striking down foes that came at him with tooth and claw, sword and club. Around him, the warriors of Lindon fought with fierce resolve, and for a time the tide was held. But the enemy was vast, and Sauron had laid his plans with cunning. Word soon reached Elrond that the eastern flank, held by the folk of Greenwood, had fallen into disorder. Eofor, their king, noble and proud, had led his warriors in a bold advance, hoping to strike deep into the enemy's ranks. But he had not heeded the commands of the High Captain. Thus they had been caught in the open by a force greater than they reckoned, and many had perished, or, among them, pierced by black arrows that fell like rain. The line had broken, and a wedge of orcs now drove deep into the flank of the alliance. Gil-galad's voice rang out above the din, commanding Elrond to take a company of swift-footed warriors and stem the breach. Without hesitation, Elend obeyed, and gathering to him a score of elves and men alike, he set off across the field, swift as the wind that rides before a storm. Through ranks of embattled soldiers he passed, weaving among spear points and fallen standards, until he came at last to the eastern quarter, where the fighting had turned chaotic. There he saw what ruin had been wrought. The green banners of the woodland folk lay trampled in the mud, and bodies lay heaped like firewood where the charge had been broken. A mass of orcs, led by black-armored captains and monstrous beasts, surged forward like a flood, seeking to divide the host. With no time to form ranks, Elend gave the only order that remained. "Follow me." With that he charged, not in a line, but as a spear point, cutting into the heart of the foe. His sword flashed, and his voice cried out words of power drawn from the deep wells of ancient elvish magic. His presence shone like a star amid storm clouds, and the warriors who followed him struck as one. For a moment, the tide recoiled, and a gap was made. Into that space they poured, driving the enemy back foot by foot, until the eastern flank was held again, though the cost was great. As the battle wore on, Elrond found himself at the very edge of exhaustion. His limbs ached, and the weight of his sword grew with every blow. Yet he pressed on, driven by purpose stronger than weariness. He saw men fall and rise again, wounded and bleeding, fighting with the last of their strength. He saw elves, their faces calm even in death, guarding their fallen with their final breath. And he saw the enemy grow bolder still, as if spurred on by a hidden will. Then a great shout arose from the center of the field, and all turned their eyes toward the hill where the standard of Gil-galad flew. There, amidst the press of battle, a shadow moved, tall and terrible, and the light around it grew dim. Sauron had come, and he bore in his hand a mace black as midnight, wreathed in fire, and upon his helm a crown of cruel iron. None who beheld him could mistake his coming, for a dread silence fell, even amid the clamor of war, and hearts failed for fear. Gil-galad and Elendil stood before him, tall and proud, their banners side by side. The High King of the Elves raised Igloo high, and its spearhead gleamed with a light that no darkness could dim. Elendil lifted Narsil, and it shone with the fire of the west. There, upon the slopes of the Black Hill, they met the Dark Lord in single combat, while all around them the battle swirled and roared. Aaron stood not far from that place, and though he could not reach his ledge in time, He beheld that duel with his own eyes, and never would he forget it while the world endured. Blows fell like thunderbolts, and the air burned with sorcery and wrath. The ground split beneath their feet, and sparks flew with every strike. But what words were spoken, what deeds done in that final struggle, he could not tell, for a great darkness veiled the hilltop, and none who stood without could pierce it. Then a cry went up, terrible and long, and the shadow recoiled, staggering back. There was a blinding flash and a sound like a mountain breaking. The light flared and then went out. When the darkness cleared, the hill was silent, and Gil-galad was gone. Then did silence fall upon the battlefield, a silence so deep and sudden that it seemed as though all the world held its breath, and the very wind stood still. The clangor of steel, the shouting of warriors, the roar of beasts, and the shriek of the dying, all were swallowed in a single moment, and only the sighing of ash upon the breeze remained, drifting like soft snow across the plain. The hill where the High King had stood, crowned in flame and defiance, now lay shrouded in smoke, and no banner stirred upon it, nor did any figure rise to greet the dawn. Elend, pressing through the remnants of the broken flank with sword still in hand, felt the shadow pass over him like a storm cloud blotting the sun, and his heart grew cold. Though no word was spoken, and no cry proclaimed it, he knew in the marrow of his bones that Gil-galad, the last great king of the New Lore in Middle-earth, had fallen. A tremor passed through the lines of the Eldar, a grief unspoken yet all-assuming, for they were bound to him by oaths of old, and to his wisdom they had looked for strength and guidance since the fading of the elder days. He came at last to the hilltop, driving back the remnants of the foe who yet lingered near it like vultures about a fallen lion. The mound was scorched and blackened, and the very stones beneath his feet were cracked and smoking. There lay High King of Men, his mighty form broken upon the ground beside the shattered blade of Narsil, which still gleamed despite the ruin of its master. The air about him was filled with the scent of burnt flesh and scorched earth, and where once two kings had stood, only ruin and silence remained. Near to him Isur knelt, weeping openly, his face marked with blood and sorrow. In his hand he held the hill shard of his father's sword, and his other hand clutched something small and black that shimmered faintly with a light that did not belong to the world of the living. Elend came forward slowly, as if walking in a dream, and his gaze fell upon the object Isildur held, and a great dread filled his spirit, for he knew then what it was. The one ring forged in the fires of Eroduin by the hand of Sauron himself, bound with the power of his will, and filled with the malice and cunning of ages. It now lay in the grasp of a mortal man, taken from the hand of the Dark Lord in the hour of his downfall. For Sauron had indeed been cast down, his body destroyed in the fury of that final struggle. But his spirit had not passed away, and his power had not been wholly undone, for it lingered in the ring like a poison in a wound that would not heal. Isildur raised his eyes, and there was a strange light in them, a hunger not born of grief alone. "It is mine now," he said, and his voice was both proud and weary. "Mine by right of conquest. I will bear it back to the White Tree, and it shall be a token of our victory." Elrond spoke not at once, for the memory of Gil-galad's voice was still in his ears, and the fire of the ring seemed to shine all the more fiercely in the cold light of the ruined hill. At length he said, "This is no token of triumph, Isildur, but a shadow of what yet remains. Sauron's strength was not wholly spent. The ring bears his will still, and through it he may endure beyond his death. Cast it into the fire and end his evil forever. But Isildur shook his head, and he closed his fist about the ring. "You are wise, son of Elendil, and your counsel is true-hearted," he said. "Yet you are not a king of men, nor have you lost what I have lost. This I will keep as weirgild for my father, and as a sign that darkness can be conquered and made to serve the light." Stepped forward, and for a moment there was great sorrow upon his face, and a deep weariness as though he had lived 10 lifetimes in a single hour. "You do not understand its nature," he said, and there was pain in his voice. "It cannot be wielded for good, nor tamed, nor bent to any will but its own. It is a trap, and even now it snares your heart." But Isildur would not listen, and he turned away, cradling the ring as if it were a jewel plucked from the crown of the stars. Thus Elrond stood alone upon the hill, the cries of the wounded rising behind him, and in his heart he knew that a great wrong had been done, though the battle had been won. Below the slope, the armies of the Free Peoples moved like a tide that ebbs after storm, gathering their dead and tending their wounded. And the orcs who remained fled, shrieking into the east, their master fallen, their ranks broken. Many days passed in mourning and in toil, for the field of Dagorlad was strewn with corpses beyond count, and the land would bear their mark for long years after. Pyres were raised, and cars of stone built high upon the hill for those whose names would not be forgotten. The kings were laid to rest with honor, Gil-galad's body borne westward by his kin, and Elendil's wrapped in the banners of his house and buried beneath a mound crowned with the stars of Numor. But peace did not return, though the enemy was routed, for the heart of the storm remained unbroken. Barad-dûr still stood, its towers looming against the blackened sky, and the land about it rear of death and despair. Though Sauron's body was gone, his malice yet lingered, and the land of Mordor was not cleansed. A great debate arose among the captains and counselors, for some held that the fortress must be utterly cast down, and the foundations of the Dark Tower broken, lest it rise again. And so it was resolved, and Eland was among those who remained, aiding in the final siege of Barad-dûr. Long was that labor, for the tower was strong, and sorcery lingered in its stones. The wind howled ever from the south, and the land wept beneath their feet. For 7 years they toiled, stone by stone, until the towers fell, and the gates were breached, and the valley of Gorgoth lay open and bare. Yet even then a shadow remained, and Elrond's heart was troubled, for he had seen the ring upon Isildur's hand, and he knew that though the body of the Dark Lord was vanquished, his soul yet clung to the world, bound to the mortal realm by the very thing Isildur had claimed. No tower, no army, no alliance could destroy the evil utterly so long as that circle of gold endured. Thus was the last alliance victorious in war, but not in peace. Hope flickered like a candle in the wind, and though songs would be sung of Dagorlad and the great kings who fell, Elend bore in his heart the weight of a choice unmade, and the long shadow of what might yet come. So passed the days of fire and ruin, and the smoke of Mordor's downfall drifted slowly from the blackened sky, borne upon winds that were no longer filled with the cries of war. Yet though the tumult of battle had faded, the hearts of those who survived were burdened with memories that no victory could erase. In the camps of the Alliance, there was no song of celebration, no festival to mark the end. For the price had been grievous, and the fate of Middle-earth still hung upon a perilous thread. Elrond moved among the wounded and the mourning, his hands swift to heal where hope yet remained, and his voice a balm to the broken-hearted. The healing arts of the Eldar were strong, and many were saved by his touch who would have perished elsewise. But even he could not mend all wounds. There were those whose spirits had been wounded more deeply than the flesh, who stared long into the dark and found no light in their eyes. And for these he wandered often to the ruins of Gil-galad's tent, now empty, save for the standard that had once crowned it. And there he sat in long silence, speaking no word. His mind turned to memories of brighter days, for the High King had been more than a lord to him. He had been a guide and guardian, a figure of wisdom and unwavering strength beneath whose counsel Elend had passed from the world. In Gil-galad's fall, a great light had passed from the world, and the west seemed further away. From the Tower of Barad-dûr came messengers at last, for though the fortress had been cast down and its gates shattered, a remnant of the enemy had hidden within the black deeps of its foundations. These were not orcs only, but men corrupted by the will of the Dark Lord, drawn from the east and south, cruel-hearted and skilled in sorcery, who had sworn never to yield so long as the eye end. Their resistance was bitter and strange, filled with spells that choked the air and riddles spoken in the tongues of the ancient East. And it was said that some among them worshipped the very memory of Sauron, believing that death in his service would bring power in a world to come. Though weary and grief-laden, joined the captains who descended into the deep vaults of the tower, for none could be certain what might yet dwell in those depths, and the darkness there was unlike that of any mere ruin. Great caverns they found, halls vast and echoing, lined with stones veined in crimson light, and pillars twisted as if the stone had been melted and shaped by a cruel hand. Strange relics lay scattered through the wreckage, banners of red and black, altars crowned with blades, and tomes written in runes long forbidden. The very walls seemed to breathe with a presence not wholly of this world. In one such hall, deep beneath the earth, they came upon a vault sealed with iron doors wrought in the likeness of serpents devouring their own tails. With much labor they broke the lock, and within found a chamber of gloom, its walls lined with obsidian mirrors that reflected not the forms of those who entered, but other darker shapes that moved where none should walk. In the center stood a pedestal of stone, and upon it rested a helm of blackened gold, twisted and cruel, upon whose brow a single red gem glowed with sullen fire. Stood long before it, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him, as though the darkness itself had awoken. He spoke no word, but turned at last to the captains and gave command that the chamber be sealed anew, its threshold guarded, and its contents left untouched. For he deemed that some evil bound to the will of Sauron yet lingered there, bound not by form, but by memory, and that to disturb it further would be to invite ruin. When the siege was ended in full, and the captains of the West met once more in council beneath the open sky, there was great debate concerning the future of the land. Some among the men of Gondor wished to settle in the shadow of Mordor, to build strongholds that would stand against the darkness should it rise again. Others, chiefly among the elves, counseled that the land be left desolate, unclaimed, and guarded as a warning and a ward. But the final word fell to Elendil's heir, Isildur, for his hand had struck the blow that felled the Dark Lord, and to him the stewardship of the realm had passed. Isildur, though noble of bearing, had grown quiet since that day upon the hill, and he spoke seldom, save when the affairs of war demanded it. Many wondered at the change, and Elrond most of all, for he had seen a light in the man's eyes that flickered strangely in the hours between battles. At times would slip away from the host and wander alone upon the ashen fields, his hand always strained to a pouch upon his breast. And when he returned, he would speak no word of what he had seen or thought. At the final gathering, Eland rose and stood before all the captains, and in clear voice he laid forth his plea once more. "The ring of Sauron yet remains," he said, "and so long as it endures, his power is not wholly ended. Though his shape is broken and his servant scattered, his spirit clings to the world, and through that ring it may return. Cast it into the fire from whence it came, and undo him forever." All eyes turned then to Isildur, and for a moment he hesitated. His hand moved to the pouch at his breast, and his fingers closed about the ring, which even now whispered in the silent places of his mind, offering greatness, remembrance, and a glory that would never fade. He looked to the mountain, dim on the southern horizon, where the fires of Ordodwin still smoldered, waiting. But he shook his head. "This I will keep," he said, and his voice was calm, though his eyes were shadowed. "It is mine by right of conquest and blood. It shall be an heirloom of my house and a sign of the victory we have won. Let no man, elf or otherwise, speak against this choice, for it is sealed." Eland bowed his head, though his heart was heavy within him. He said no more, for he saw that mind was set, and no words would move him now. The council ended, and the host began its long march homeward. Thus ended the war of the last alliance, and thus was the first chance to destroy the ring lost. Not by the power of Sauron, nor by the treachery of foes, but by the will of one who deemed himself strong enough to master it. And so the seeds of future sorrow were sown. So it was that the ring passed into the keeping of men, and with its taking the fate of Middle East turned subtly, though few perceived it then. For the outward signs of victory were bright and plentiful, and the darkness that had loomed so near now seemed to wane with every mile that carried the host westward from the ashes of Gorgoth. Yet Eland, son of Elendil, whose memory ran far and deep, bore a shadow within his heart, and though he spoke little of it, he saw with sorrow that the burden of what had been left undone weighed more heavily than most could know. The road from Mordor was long and laden with toil, for the land through which they passed bore the scars of fire and war, and many among the host had been wounded in body and in soul. They marched in silence for many days, bearing their dead in honor, and gathering what strength remained to them in the hopes of peace. The banners of Gil-galad were folded and borne westward, never again to fly in battle. And the sword Narsil, broken in Elendil's fall, was carried by Isildur, its shards bound in linen and guarded with care. The men of Gondor and Arnor took up the burden of their slain king with pride mingled with sorrow, and vowed that the kingdom of the West would stand yet stronger in his memory. Eland rode not at the head of the march, nor did he walk in any proud retinue, but kept to himself or walked among the sick and grieving, speaking soft words of comfort and watching the land with eyes that missed little. He passed through Athlion, still fair though marred by war, and lingered beneath the tall trees of the Afil Duath, whose slopes whispered in the wind. In secret he spoke with Círdan the shipwright, who had come by ship up Anduin, bearing tidings from the western coasts, and they spoke long concerning the future and the part yet to play. But the thoughts of the people were upon nearer things, and many looked to Isildur with hope, for he bore himself now as a king indeed, and his words were wise, and his presence noble. Yet always the ring was near to him, hanging upon a chain about his neck, hidden from sight, but never wholly from mind. At times he would fall silent in council, and his eyes would grow distant. At others he would speak with fervor of the kingdoms he would restore and the high works he would raise upon the foundations of Numor's memory. When at last they came to the borders of Gondor, the host divided. Anarion, his brother, who had held Okelith and Minas Anor against the tide of Sauron's wrath, now took charge of the southern realm, for he had dwelt there throughout the war and was beloved by the people. Isildur, desiring to return north to his own lands in Arnor, prepared to journey by the road that ran beside Anduin, intending to follow the river until he reached the high vales of the north, where the stars seemed nearer, and the sea was but a dream. Before he departed, Elrond came to him once more, not in wrath or pride, but in quiet hope that some final plea might yet find purchase. "The ring," he said, "is not as other things. It has a will and a thought of its own, and it is not given to any master but its maker. You are noble, is elder, and strong of will, but the seeds of its corruption lie deep. Cast it into the sea if the fire is too far now, or bury it beneath stone, but do not carry it further. Let this be the end of it." But Eskialdor placed his hand upon the chain at his breast, and he answered not harshly, but with a resolve that would not be moved. "I hear your counsel, son of Elvin," he said, "and I do not scorn it. Yet the ring is mine by blood and by right, and in it is bound the memory of all we have lost. I will not destroy it, nor hide it as if it were some cursed relic, for I am not afraid of it. I shall guard it well, and in the fullness of days I shall give it to my heirs, that they may remember the price of victory." Elend bowed his head, for he saw that the moment had passed. "So be it," he said, and his words were full of sorrow. "Yet I fear that this memory shall prove bitter in the end, and that your heirs shall pay a price far greater than the one you hope to spare them." Departed, and Elend returned to Lindon by the long western roads, passing through lands both fair and desolate, and at length came again to Imladras, the hidden valley in the north, which he had founded as a refuge in the dark days of the war. There he laid aside his sword, and there many came to him in the years that followed, seeking counsel and healing, for his wisdom had grown great, and his name was honored among elves and men alive. But in his heart he bore always the memory of the ring, and the fire upon the hill where Gil-galad fell, and a foreboding that the shadow had not been wholly vanquished, but only cast into silence for a time. Isildur departed with a small company of knights and kin, bearing with him the shards of Narsil and the One Ring, and for many days they traveled northward in peace, passing through fair lands and sleeping beneath the stars. The air grew cleaner and the trees more golden, and hope returned to the hearts of his people. Yet danger still lingered in the hidden places of the world, and all too soon the shadow stirred once more. In the vale of the Gladden Fields, where the river ran shallow among reeds and lily pools, the company of Isildur was set upon by a sudden and terrible ambush. Orcs of the misty mountains, remnants of the broken legions, had fled eastward and lingered in the wilds. And now, driven by malice or drawn by the unseen whisper of the ring, they struck with savage fury. Caught unawares, the Dunedain were slain one by one. Though Isildur fought valiantly, wielding blade and bow with the prowess of his house, the tide was too great, and the night closed around him. In a final, desperate act, he cast off his armor and plunged into the river, trusting to elven lore and the stealth of the waters to bear him away. Yet the ring, treacherous even in that hour, slipped from his finger as he swam, and its power to hide him vanished. Arrows found him in the shallows, and so is perished, not upon a throne, nor in the glory of kingship, but alone beneath the stars, unwept and unhonored. And the ring sank beneath the waters of the Gladden, lost to all knowledge. Thus ended the heir of Elendil, and thus the ring passed once more into shadow, and Eland, far in the north, felt a chill upon the wind, and he knew that the tale was not ended. Now the years drew on slow and silent, as the long peace settled like mist upon the lands of the west, though it was a peace of quiet watchfulness rather than true rest. For those who remembered the war did not forget its cost, nor did they believe that the shadow had truly perished. The power of the elves waned slowly, like the ebbing of the tide beneath a moonless sky, and many among their kindred turned their eyes westward across the sea to the Undying Lands, seeking the light that no longer shone so brightly in Middle-earth. The realm of Lindon, once full of laughter and song, grew still and solemn, and though the havens of Mithil remained, and ships still sailed under the care of Curtain, the high days of the Eldar had passed into memory. In Imadris, the hidden valley of the north, Eland labored long and faithfully, tending to the wounds of a broken age. There he gathered the wisdom of the elder days and preserved the lore of the firstborn in the Adine, for he foresaw that the time would come when such knowledge would be needed again. His hall became a place of learning and healing, a haven against the gathering shadows, and to it came many who sought counsel, refuge, or hope. Yet though he welcomed all with grace, and though his voice was filled with kindness, there remained in his eyes a gleam of sorrow that never faded. And those who looked closely saw that he bore within him the weight of things long past. He spoke seldom of the last alliance, save to those whose right it was to know, and even then he named it only in measured words. Of the fall of Gil-galad he spoke with reverence and mourning, but of the ring he said little, for its fate had passed from the knowledge of elves and men. Yet ever he kept watch upon the north, and though the tale of his elder's death became legend, and the ring was deemed lost forever, Eland did not forget. In secret he sent forth scouts into the wild places of the world, and he marked the passage of years with care, noting each sign of unrest that stirred in the shadowed corners of Middle-earth. In those days, the kingdoms of men endured, though they grew apart in strength and purpose. Gondor flourished for a time under the rule of Anarian's line, raising tall cities and guarding the southern marches with watchful eyes. Arnor in the north was less fortunate, for its lords became divided, and its strength waned beneath the slow hand of time. Elrond, though not their king, was ever a friend to the Dunedain of the north, for their blood was near to his, and he saw in them the remnants of the old nobility that had crossed the sea with Elendil. Thus it was that in the long years that followed, he came to be a silent guardian of their line, fostering their children when war or mischance took their fathers, and guiding them with wisdom earned through bitter trial. In the house of Imladras grew many scions of that ancient race, and in their veins ran both the pride of Newmore and the memory of Elvenkin. Yet even among them, the name of the ring passed into shadow, and few knew what had truly been lost in the waters of the Gladden. Long indeed it remained hidden, untouched and unspoken, resting deep beneath the reeds where no light reached. The world moved above it, and kingdoms rose and fell, and forests grew and died, and the stars wheeled in silence across the sky. But still it endured, perfect and whole, bearing the will of its master, though his form was broken. The ring did not sleep, nor did it forget, and in time it began to stir once more. In the east, the signs were subtle at first, whispers carried on the wind from beyond the mountains of shadow. Strange fires glimpsed upon the horizon, and creatures long thought dead returning to haunt the hills and ruins. Elend heard tidings from travelers and rangers, and though each tale was small, taken together, they formed a pattern, dark and foreboding. He spoke often with Sauron at the havens, and they pondered the ancient prophecies and the words of the wise, recalling that the enemy's power was bound to the ring and would never be wholly undone while it endured. And then, in a time yet far from the ending of that age, a whisper came of a creature not wholly of elf, nor orc, nor man, who had been seen wandering the wilds of the misty mountains, pale and thin, speaking to shadows and hungering for a nameless thing. Some named him Gollum and said that he crept along the riverbeds and through dark caves, muttering of his precious and fleeing from the sun as a worm flee the floor. Few believed these tales, and fewer still gave them thought. Yet Elend heard, and his heart was troubled. Still the ring remained hidden, and no hand claimed it. But the signs were clear to those with eyes to see. Evil was not destroyed, only diminished. Though the White Council had not yet gathered, and the great events of the Third Age lay far ahead, the road was already set, and Elend knew that the burden left uncast into the fire would rise again, and that a time would come when choice and courage would once more be tested. And so he prepared, not with armies nor towers, but with wisdom and patience, guarding what light remained in the west, and waiting for the hour when hope would be needed most. He kept the memory of Gil-galad and Elendil alive, and in secret he nurtured the line of kings, for he saw that in the end it would not be the strength of arms that decided the fate of the world, but the steadfast heart of one who chose the path of sacrifice. Thus the long watch began, and in the house of Imladras the light still shone, even as the stars grew fainter in the sky. The nape is only look at this video, which was time which brings forgetting to the minds of many, and lays even the proudest of towers low, moved ever onward. And the tales of the last alliance passed into legend, spoken only by lore masters and minstrels, or murmured beside the hearths of those who still clung to the fading glory of days long past. Yet in Imladras, where the memory of the firstborn endured unbroken, the fire of that ancient war had not gone out, though it burned low beneath the veil of quiet years. There Elrond dwelt, unchanged in form and undemeaned in mind, while all about him the world shifted like the leaves of autumn upon the wind. Though the kingdoms of men in the north had splintered and declined, the Dunedain of Arnor, scattered and few, yet clung to their purpose. They became wanderers of the wild, secretive and stern, guarding the forgotten borders of the west and watching the dark places with vigilant eyes. Elrond took these remnants into his care, sheltering their chieftains in his house and teaching them the lore and wisdom of old, for he foresaw that from this lineage hope might yet be rekindled. Though many winters must pass before the day of its flowering, to the elves who remained, he was both lord and sage, beloved and honored, and in his counsel they placed great trust. But Elend himself bore the weight of long years, and his heart was often troubled, for he perceived more than most the slow fading of his people and the weariness that lay upon the land. The sea called to many, and those who remembered Valinor with longing at last heeded the call, departing over the bent seas to the Undying Lands, leaving Middle-earth to the dominion of men. Imladras remained a hidden light in the gathering gloom, but fewer were its halls filled with song, and the laughter of the Elendil grew scarce. In that age, the wise began to stir again. Those ancient ones who had taken upon themselves the guardianship of Middle-earth in its peril. Among them came Mithrandir, the great pilgrim, known to elves and men alike, who wandered far in humble raiment, yet bore the flame of secret fire within him. He came often to Imladric, and sat long in converse with Elrond beneath the stars, or by the fire in the Hall of Fire, where tales were told in the ancient tongue, and songs of sorrow and hope wove together like silver threads upon a dark loom. It was in such a time that a shadow began once more to lengthen in the east. Though few perceived it for what it was, the dark forest once called Greenwood the Great grew foul with a creeping dread, and men began to speak of a necromancer dwelling in a fortress of sorcery hidden deep within its heart. The wise, though divided in their counsels, sent spies and emissaries to learn the truth, and the name of Dol Guldur began to pass from lip to lip, a name of foreboding, whispered in fear and uncertainty. Elend, who had once stood before the Dark Lord himself and seen the ruin that a single will could work upon the world, feared that this new evil was no less a shadow, but a part of the same ancient darkness, grown again from the root that had never been wholly destroyed. Yet none could prove it, for the power that guarded Dol Guldur was cunning and veiled, and none who entered its halls came forth again to speak of what they had seen. Meanwhile, tales began to reach Imladras from the north, strange and wild, of a creature that crept through the mountains, whose form was twisted by hunger and time, and whose speech was broken with malice and longing. Some called him a phantom, others a beast. But to Elend, the rumors brought no surprise, for in his heart he had long believed that the ring had not perished, and that where it lay, it would draw to itself those who desired it, whether in love or in hatred. Still he kept silence, for he knew that the hour of its return had not yet come, and that the time was not ripe for its unmaking. Many years would still pass before the threads drawn tight in the war of the last alliance would weave again into a single fate, and the fire of Mount Doom would flare once more in judgment. In these days also was born to Elend a daughter, Arwen Untoel, fairest of the children of Lucian, whose beauty would be sung in the ages to come. She grew tall and wise within the sheltered valley, learning the arts of healing and song, and her laughter brought new light to the fading halls of Imladras. Her presence was a balm to Eland, for in her he saw both the hope of his house and the memory of all that was lost. The grace of the Elodar, the spirit of men, and the unyielding light that had kindled in Lucian the Blessed. But even this joy was tempered by foreboding, for Elrond foresaw that in Arwen's fate a great sorrow would lie, and that her choice would echo the doom of her house. Yet he spoke no word of it then, for love cannot be forestalled by fear, and the path of the heart is not governed by foresight. Thus the years passed, and the world changed. The dwarves delved ever deeper into their mountains, and men spread across the lands, raising kingdoms and falling into ruin. The elves diminished, and the stars seemed to fade from the night sky. But in Imblatus the fire still burned, and Elend kept watch, his gaze turned eastward, his heart ever vigilant, for he knew the tale was not ended. And far beneath the waters of the Gladden Fields, where reeds stirred in the wind, and the sunlight played upon the shallows, the ring lay waiting, forgotten by the world, yet not asleep. The shadows had begun to stir once more in the turning of the Third Age, when the stars had wheeled many times across the heavens since the fall of Gil-galad and Elendil upon the black plain of Dagorlad, and the tale of their great war had grown dim in the minds of men, save the songs of the elves and the records of the lore masters. A change came at last to the fate of the One Ring, which had lain hidden in the deeps of Anduin for more than 2,000 years. Long it had waited, silent and cunning, calling out in whispers to the world above. And at length, in that forgotten vale where Isildur had perished, it was found again by hands ill-suited for such a burden. A creature of small stature and broken soul, whose name had once been Smeagol, came upon it by chance, or so it seemed to those who knew little of the will that lay within the ring. On a day of shadowed sky and slow waters, as he wandered along the banks of the Gladden, fishing and muttering to himself, the ring stirred from its slumber and rose in the currents until it gleamed upon the silted bed, and its whisper passed into his heart like a sigh of old desire. Thereupon was wrought a change dark and terrible. Smeagol, ensnared by the ring's voice and claiming it for his own, fell swiftly into shadow. He slew his kin, took the ring in secret, and fled into exile beneath the mountains. There he became Gollum, so named for the rasping sound of his speech, and in darkness he dwelt for many lifetimes of men, whispering to his treasure and wasting away, his body twisted, his mind broken, but his will still clinging to the ring with a love both loathsome and pitiful. Thus the ring, though still hidden from the eyes of kings and lords, began once more to work its subtle influence upon the world. Its power was diminished, for its master had no form, and his spirit was dispersed. Yet the ring had not forgotten him, nor he it. In time, the whispers passed beyond the caverns where Gollum crouched, and the knowledge of the ring's survival stirred faintly in the mind of Sauron, whose spirit, long wandering, had begun to gather again in Seek. The necromancer of Dolor, long feared and half forgotten, now grew bolder, and his shadow stretched further across the greenwood until the wise could no longer doubt what they had long suspected. It was Sauron returned in secret, still formless yet regaining strength, and his servants, both seen and unseen, moved once more through the dark corners of the world, seeking knowledge, gathering power, and searching ever for that which had been lost. In those days, Elend, though grown weary with long vigil, did not abandon his watch, for he perceived that the end of the age approached. Many of his kin had departed oversea, and the realm of Imladras had grown quiet and solemn, its halls filled with memory more than mirth. Yet the fire in his spirit had not dimmed, and his purpose had not faltered. Messengers came and went from his house, bearing news from every corner of the West, and in his halls gathered the wise, speaking of signs and portents, and the need for renewed vigilance. It was during this time that a strange tale reached his ears from the Shire, a quiet land far to the west, where rustic folk known as hobbits lived in peace and obscurity. A traveler of curious habits, one Bilbo Baggins by name, had returned from a perilous journey through Wilderland, bearing with him a small golden ring of unknown origin. Found, he claimed, in the depths beneath the misty mountains, his tale was told in jest and wonder among his kin. But to those who listened with deeper hearing, there were dissonant notes beneath the mirth. Gandalf the Grey, ever watchful, brought word of this to Elend, and together they pondered the riddle. Long did Gandalf search for truth, and at last the shadow of doubt hardened into knowledge. The ring found by Bilbo was indeed the one, lost since Isildur's fall, and now returned to the world of light. The peril long feared had come at last. Elend summoned the wise to Imladric, and there was held the council that would shape the fate of the Third Age. From many realms they came, men from the south and west, elves from Elth-Lorien and Mirkwood, dwarves from the halls of Erebor, and a few among the hobbits themselves, unlikely as they seemed to those who had seen the might of ancient kings. Yet the times had changed, and power no longer dwelt only with the strong and the tall. At that council, Elrond stood once more not only as master of his house, but as a herald of the elder days, bearing witness to the long tale that had begun in the fires of Veron, passed through the slaughter at Dagorlad, and now reached its bitter reckoning in the hands of a small and simple folk. He recounted the war of the last alliance, the fall of Gil-galad and Elendil, the failure of Isildur, and the long years of silence that followed. All listened in silence, for his voice carried the weight of truth, and the memory of sorrow not faded. Thus it was decided that the ring must be destroyed, not hidden nor wielded, for its nature remained unchanged, and through it the world would fall into shadow if it were claimed by any, even with intent of good. And since none could be trusted to bear such a burden in strength and power, it was entrusted instead to the humble and the faithful. To Frodo Baggins, kinsman of Bilbo, the task was given, and the fate of the age placed upon his shoulders. Elend, though he knew the road would lead to suffering and loss, did not stand against it, for he perceived that strength of arms would not prevail, and that in the heart of the mountain alone could the fire of the enemy be undone. So the fellowship was formed beneath his roof, and from his house they set forth, 9 in number, to walk the wild road to Mordor, not as warriors of renown, but as bearers of hope. And Elrond stood upon the terrace of Imladris and watched them go. And he said no word, for he knew that their task was their own, and that the road they walked was one no lore could guide. Yet in his heart he followed them with blessing and sorrow, and in the silence of his house he waited once more. Thus it was that the tale which had begun in fire and blood upon the fields of Dagorlad passed at last into its final chapter, not through the might of kings nor the swords of warriors, but in the quiet courage of those whom none had foreseen would bear so great a burden. The fellowship departed from Imladric in the gray light of winter's waning, and though their footsteps made no echo upon the frozen stones, the weight of their quest stirred the deep waters of fate, and all the world seemed to grow still, as though in breathless expectation. Elend remained behind, for his path in that hour did not lead to the Black Land. Yet his thought followed them unceasingly. His heart, which had seen so much and endured the sorrow of many ages, now bore the hope of a world that teetered upon the edge of ruin. Often he stood beneath the trees of the hidden valley, gazing southward where the mountains met the sky, and he pondered long the choice of his Ildild and the long chain of events that had unfolded from that single moment of pride. In those days, the watchers of Eladris became more vigilant, and word came to Elrond from every quarter. He heard of battles in the north, where the Dunedain rode in secret to defend the borders of Eriador, though their numbers were few and their foes many. From the south came whispers of war in Gondor and Rohan, where the servants of the Dark Lord gathered strength, and clouds of darkness spread from Mordor like a tide without end. The days grew shorter, and the nights longer and more full of dread. Elrond sent his sons Eladon and Elrohir forth with the rangers, for they were tireless hunters of the enemy and bore no fear of the wild. They brought news of struggle and ruin, but also of hope, for they spoke often of one among the Dunedain, tall and gray-eyed, who bore himself with the majesty of old, and whose deeds in secret kept alive the flame of the West. This was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, last of the line of Isil, who had long walked in shadow, yet in whom Elrond saw the glimmer of the kingship that had once been lost. Now Elrond's thought turned more often to his daughter Arwen, whose choice had grown clear, though it grieved him. For in Aragorn she had found the echo of her foremother Luthien, and the same fate now lay before her, to forsake the immortal life of the Eldar and cleave to the doom of men, binding her light to the fleeting years of the world. Elrond had spoken against it, not in anger, but in sorrow, for he knew the pain of such partings and the toll it would take upon both their hearts. Yet the choice was hers, and in her eyes he saw the resolve of one who walks a path freely chosen and will not turn aside. When the war came at last in full, and the world was shaken by storm and fire, Elrond took counsel with the wise and sent aid where he could. Though the elves no longer marched in great hosts, the warriors of Imladras rode forth with his sons to join the final battles, and upon the fields of the Pelennor, and later before the Black Gate itself. They stood beside the sons of men in the last defiance. Elend himself did not ride to war, for his charge lay elsewhere, and his strength was turned toward that which still might be preserved, should all else fail. But in the hour of greatest need, when the ring-bearer had vanished into the wastes of Mordor, and no word came from the south, Elrond was not idle. He went by paths unknown to men. He came at last to Lorien, and spoke there with Galadriel and Celeborn, for the time had come to prepare the way, whether for victory or for grief. It was he who bore Andoril, flame of the west, reforged from the shards of Narsil, and placed it in the hand of Aragorn upon the eve of war, that the king might rise again in truth, and not in name alone. And the world was set ablaze with the fire of choice and sacrifice. And in the land of Mordor, Frodo Baggins fulfilled that which Isildur would not. The ring was cast into the fire, and the will of Sauron was unmade. The mountains split with flame, and the dark tower fell in ruin. The eagles cried in the sky, and the wind blew clean across the land for the first time in many long years. With the fall of the shadow, the Third Age came to its end, and the world passed into a new time, no longer under the sway of the elves and the high lords of old. The kingdoms of men were restored, and Aragorn Elar took the crown of Gondor and Arnor in the sight of all, and peace was renewed. Eland came at last to minister Tirith, and there he beheld his daughter, clothed in silver, and crowned with white blossoms, as she wedded the king, and bound her fate forever to the world of men. Though joy was upon the city, and many songs were sung of hope restored, and evil undone, Elrond's heart was divided. He had done all that could be done, had watched and waited through long ages, had seen the darkness fall and rise again, and now had seen it broken. Yet he knew that his time in Middle-earth had come to its close, and that the sorrow of parting could not be undone by victory alone. At last he returned to Imladras, and for a little while dwelt there in quiet, walking beneath the trees of his hidden valley, speaking no more of war or ring, but only of the stars and the sea. Then came the day appointed when the last ship would sail from the havens of Mithland, bearing the bearers of the 3 rings whose task was fulfilled. With him went Galadriel and Gandalf, and with them also went Frodo and Bilbo, whose small hands had shaped the fate of the world more surely than any sword. And so Elrond, son of Elendil, herald of Gil-galad, lord of Rivendell, passed at last from the shores of Middle-earth, leaving behind the land he had loved, the people he had guided, and the long years of toil and grief that had shaped his life. His tale became part of the elder days, and the light that had burned in the west grew dimmer, but not wholly extinguished. For though the high elves had departed, and the great kings slept in their tombs, and the ring was no more, still the memory of what had been lingered in the stones and rivers of the world, in the songs of the wise and the hearts of those who did not forget. And thus ended the tale of Elend at the Battle of Dagorlad, though its echoes would ring long through the ages that followed, like the music of the sea, never silenced.